Welcome to the St. John Genealogy Project webcast. Today we will be exploring some lesser-known aspects of the St. John family, uncovering their fascinating stories and ancestral connections. Episode 3. The Names the Same. Elizabeth de la Barre. 26 Alexander St. Johns. 77 Oliver St. Johns. 354 John St. Johns. 371 William St. Johns. That is how many of each of just those names I have documented on the St. John Genealogy Project website. A common mistake in genealogy research is called the names the same. It refers to finding a name in a source and assuming they are the person being researched, simply because they have the same name. The reality is many people, even within one community and time, could have the same name. People understand this when the surname is Smith, but for some reason when it is St. John or de la Barre, for example, people seem to lose all sight of logic. The phenomenon of accepting the name is the same is generally attributed to being a mistake beginners make, but for the St. John families, I have found this to occur repeatedly in academia, by respected genealogists, and within well-received genealogical publications. When I try to fix these errors, I am met with, show me the source confrontation. The reliance on the source alone is evidence of weaponized incompetence to shut me down. The source becomes the weapon, and the lack of investigation from the requester reveals the incompetence. Understanding the reasons some sources are being used incorrectly requires sometimes hours, weeks, or years of study that people expect me to explain to them in 30 seconds. When I'm dealing with these individuals, they will run to published sources that repeat the same error they believe, and rely on this as an echo chamber for continuing to resist learning or investigating further themselves. They want the information handed to them, but not when it contradicts information they already accepted and previously had handed to them. In the St. John Genealogy Project, this becomes even more troublesome because we have two St. John families that descend paternally from two different men, Ralph St. John of St. Jean-le-Thomas and Adam Deport of Basing. In most cases, these lineages can only be distinguished today because of Y-DNA testing for their descendants, because the historians, academia, and the College of Arms have obliterated the lineages so badly in their publications by asserting claims on top of the original data that obfuscates reality by using the heraldic title Bolingbroke to create a connotation between the record and persons unrelated in order to create an emotional attachment or response to the social title. What this did, unfortunately, is prevent people from using the record in critical study. There are numerous instances of the names the same in the research of the St. John lineages. In the case of two women named Elizabeth de la Barre, one married Oliver Deport St. John, and the other married John St. John. To resolve this conflict, to merge these two women, and to merge these two St. John families, these researchers claimed the St. John man was John Oliver St. John, or Oliver John St. John. They just give him a middle name, rather than do any further investigation. Many researchers rely on secondary sources, and assume the authors of these sources always got it right. What I noticed early on were so many of these reliable sources conflicted with one another. So I began contacting the owners of the primary records sourced in the secondary publications, and requested my own digital copies. I then spent 4 years sorting out the issues. To do this, I created mini family trees that I taped to the wall in my office. I began with one source and created the whole family tree based on its claims. Then I moved on to the next source. When conflict was introduced, I would scrap all of it and start over until I realized which source was creating the conflict. In most cases, it was Harold Richard St. George and publications that relied on his claims. Once I removed him and the repeaters of his claims, I was able to make significant progress. So if you research St. John's, I recommend you stop relying on Richard St. George's merging and creative mistakes. Part 1. The name's the same. Elizabeth de la Barre II of Webley Castle married John St. John of East Lacombe. What I do is look for a grounding record. For Elizabeth de la Barre that married John St. John, that grounding record is the Inquisition post-mortem for Oliver St. John Chevalier, who died in August of the 47th year of the reign of Edward III, or in 1374. He was seized of the manor of East Lacombe. This record gives us a name, a date, and a property to start with that we can build from in order to map this family and identify the correct Elizabeth de la Barre that belonged to this family. This Oliver St. John was the son of Alexander St. John of Devon and the daughter of John Arundel. Alexander married second Elizabeth, the widow of Hugh Lacombe. His son Oliver married Hugh and Elizabeth Lacombe's daughter, also named Elizabeth Lacombe. The next records are a lawsuit between Elizabeth de la Barre St. John and Oliver's brother Henry St. John. From these records, we again see references to East Lacombe to ensure we are still discussing the same St. John family of East Lacombe. This record states Elizabeth was the daughter of Sir John de la Barre. She was the widow of John, son of Oliver St. John, and she asserts that a certain boy named John to be the son and heir of John St. John, the son and heir of Oliver St. John. And again, this lawsuit is concerning the property of East Lacombe. So again, we have Elizabeth de la Barre was the widow of John St. John. Elizabeth de la Barre's husband was the son of Oliver St. John of East Lacombe. And that John and Elizabeth de la Barre had a son named John. And finally, that the John who was the subject of the lawsuit between Henry St. John and Elizabeth de la Barre was the son of John St. John and the grandson of Oliver St. John, thus making him the great-nephew of Henry St. John. Part 2. The name's the same. Elizabeth de la Barre I, daughter of John de la Barre and Isabella de Moulton, the stepdaughter of John Arundel, who married Oliver de Port St. John. The Arundel pedigree, unfortunately, is a little off because the creators once again did not realize that two St. John families existed. A better source for the information this pedigree is trying to depict is found in the Arundel deeds. The Arundel deeds explain that John Arundel was first married to Elizabeth Carmenow, and that their son John was the next heir. If his heirs failed, then the next heir was his stepdaughter Elizabeth de la Barre and her husband Oliver de Port St. John. If the de Port St. John heirs failed, then the next heirs were the sisters of John Arundel, the daughters of John Arundel and Elizabeth Carmenow, in order beginning with Margaret. The inheritance for Elizabeth de la Barre was further detailed in the Blount deeds, when the forfeits of Penmark were split, providing Porthcurry to Elizabeth de la Barre or her heirs. And now, following the Glamorgan pedigrees, assembled in 1678 by Sir Isaac Hurd Knight, a Garter King of Arms, and edited by Sir Thomas Phillips Bart, based on much earlier pedigree records created several hundred years earlier, we can see one of these two men affix their opinion to the original data, linking John St. John of East Lacombe to the de Port St. John family by saying the Earl of Bolingbroke descended from this John St. John and Elizabeth de la Barre, when instead the Earl of Bolingbroke descended from the other Elizabeth de la Barre and her husband Oliver de Port St. John. When we research beyond the same name and identify the other details pertaining to the person's life, we can see that we have the potential to find inconsistencies between two people that signal to us that these people with the same name are not the same person. In this same name case for Elizabeth de la Barre, it becomes obvious that one married John St. John of East Lacombe and the other married Oliver de Port St. John, and that there is zero evidence that either man was called Oliver John St. John or John Oliver St. John. Rather than merge these two families, we should always instead consider they are separate and distinct individuals with their own lives, families, histories, and properties.